Welcome to Literary Libations with Librarians. And this time, as we share books, we are going to be remembering those who served as we approach this Veterans Day. As we share these titles, if you are interested in getting your hands on any of them, there are several ways to go about doing that. The first is to simply call your local branch of the Monroe County Library System and talk to the staff there. They'll be more than happy to assist you. If you'd prefer to do it on your own, you can go to our catalog, which is the first web address that you see on your screen, and you can request physical versions. Some of our titles will be available digitally, and we have two apps that you could use. There is Overdrive, which the app is Libby, so you'll want to search for Libby in your app store. And Overdrive provides downloadable ebooks and audiobooks and also a plethora of popular magazines. The other app you may see is Hoopla, and you'll go to the Hoopla app, and Hoopla provides downloadable ebooks, audiobooks, and also movies, music, and graphic novels. And the great thing about Hoopla is if you use an instant borrow, you'll see that lightning bolt in the corner, and you'll be able to download it immediately. There's no wait, and you can have it, and so can your friend across the street. So there's no limits on those instant borrows in Hoopla. I am Jennifer Graneski, and I am the community librarian at the Dundee Branch Library. And in light of looking at Veterans Day as it approaching, our question for this week is, what does Veterans Day mean to you? And I have to be honest, you know, a lot of times I don't even think about Veterans Day when it's here. It's just, you know, it's smack dab in the middle of the week, and I don't take the time to really think about it and appreciate it. And in thinking about it for this get together to talk about books, it definitely made me think of my grandfather, my Grandpa Webb, who served in World War II as a medical assistant. He almost never talked about his time in the war. So apart from knowing that he was a medic, that's all we really know. He would tell good stories about his return from the war. And during the war, my grandmother had twins, my mom's two oldest sisters, and she had twins, and my grandpa didn't see them until they were almost 2 years old. So it also makes me think about not just those who are on the field and right in the middle of that war, but also all of those who stay home, you know. And I do have friends from college who have husbands that served, and they've traveled around the world, and the concerns that they face and knowing that their spouses and partners are out there. So it just makes me thoughtful about why we get into wars, about those who have fought for our country and those who come home, and what do they come home to. And it makes me appreciate the sacrifices that they make. Because while Memorial Day helps us to remember those who passed while they were serving, Veterans Day remembers all of those who have served. So those who came home and what their lives are like now, and what is our country doing to support them every single day and support their families. So there's just a lot there. It feels really heavy to me thinking about that and just wondering what I can do. But if you want to do something, there are all sorts of great veterans organizations out there that would be more than happy to have volunteers that you can donate to as well. So I know that was kind of long and rambly, but you know, it is what it is. So also with us this week is Joyce Tatke, who is a processor at our DAMI administration building. And what does Veterans Day mean to you, Joyce?
Well, like you, my grandfather served in World War II. He was called up at the end of 1944, and actually his training got cut short because the Battle of the Bulge caused such a huge shortage of manpower. So he was shipped to Germany as quickly as possible. He was there for about a year, and you know, we talked more with the boys of the family about what he went through, but he didn't talk very often about it. He did say that when he left behind his wife and 3 small children, and when he got back, he discovered his wife could handle things just fine without him. I think he always had a lot of respect for my grandma because of that, because she had to deal with her husband just disappearing. I've had my brother also served, fortunately not in wartime. two cousins that have served. One of them did get called up into Operation Desert Storm. Fortunately came home, but again, he had to leave behind a wife and two little girls. So it really does impact the families left behind. And again, rambly like you, when you first posed the question, I thought about when I went to Washington, D.C. with my youngest daughter and visiting the war memorials, which again is Memorial Day, but seeing the veterans there visiting the memorials, the World War II memorial, and the Vietnam memorial and the Korean memorial. There's always veterans there visiting, and you can see how much it impacts them, of these friends that they lost. So that's what it means to me.
Thank you, Joyce. Also with us this week is Jessica Otto, our head of collections. And what does Veterans Day mean to you, Jessica?
Hello. For me, Veterans Day is a day to reflect on the sacrifices made by those who served, the sacrifices that they made yesterday, so that I may live my life in freedom today. I'd like to share a quote from one of the books that I will be talking about today, from a World War II medic, Eugene Rowe, his grandson, Derek, as he learned more about these veterans and what they did for our country. And his quote was, "The freedom I live with and enjoy was established in their blood." And when I read that, I thought a lot about that, and I realized that there truly are no words strong enough to convey the gratitude I feel to those who have made such sacrifices. And so I just try to read as much as possible the stories and keep stories alive and find out what, these people who have served, what they did to make sure that their stories aren't forgotten, and to share those stories, like I will be sharing some of them today, and also to try to look at the challenges that they faced and how could some of that be similar to maybe challenges I face? What lessons can I learn and apply to my life on a daily basis? So in a nutshell, that is what Veterans Day means to me.
Thank you, Jess. And finally, we have Kristen Brown with us this week, and she is a reference librarian at our Bedford branch. And what does Veterans Day mean to you, Kristen?
So to just reiterate what everybody has already been talking about with sacrifice, that was like the big thing that came up when you posed this question, was just the sacrifice on all aspects. So when you talk about the sacrifice of leaving a family behind and knowingly taking this risk, but doing it because you feel like it's your job and it's what you feel passionate about and it's what you want to do, and also those that are left home who bear also the emotional weight of having the people that they love the most be gone and be away and not knowing what's happening with those situations. So absolutely sacrifice, 100%. And as you guys were talking, it also reminded me of when I used to work at Applebee's and we would have the veterans come in. We'd do like free meal on Veterans Day, and they would wear their military form, like their hats, and they would bring in old pictures and they would talk, and that was probably one of my favorite days being a server, because you got to slow down and actually talk to people and hear their stories, and it just really made you appreciate and take into perspective everything they went through and the different ways that they handle those emotions. Like some people were really excited to share with you their situations, and others were a little more reserved, and it just really put perspective on that. So absolutely, gratitude and sacrifice.
Thank you, Kristen. My computer's being a little glitchy here, so if I glitch out, you all just keep going without me. Thank you to each of you for sharing your thoughts on Veterans Day. And now we're going to share some titles that we picked out that help us remember those who served. And to kick us off, let's have Joyce start, please.
Okay, well, yeah, you're going to start with the odd ones. I, of course, had to pick children's books because I honestly believe that there's very few topics that our children cannot handle if handled appropriately. And war is a pretty heavy topic, but they need to learn, to show the respect. That being said, the first title I have is actually going to be a little strange because I'm not going to be talking about an American hero. I'm actually going to be talking about the Japanese bomber, the man who actually was able to bomb the mainland United States. He's the only one in the war who did it. His name, and I'm sorry for anybody out there of Japanese descent who is, I'm going to butcher this name, but I'm going to try. Nobuo Fujita. He was the pilot who flew over Oregon and dropped 2 bombs. The idea was he dropped them into the woods, and the idea was he was supposed to be starting a fire that would, destroy this forest. But I don't think their intelligence was quite good enough because Oregon is very wet. And it had rained not too long before. And the first bomb started a little fire that fizzled out. And the second bomb just sort of disappeared. And the people of the nearby town went and checked it out. And they thought at first it was started by a lightning. But then they realized they found some metal fragments with Japanese writing on it. So they realized they'd been bombed, and it was kind of a story for a bit. He did it again 20 days later, and even though the end result wasn't what they were expecting, they did consider it to be a success because he did successfully bomb the United States. And then this was in 1942. Of course, in 1945, the war ended. He went back home. He started a hardware store, and he just did his best to forget about it. But 20 years later, the nearby town, Brookings, the JCs decided to try to build up tourism in the area. And they said, hey, let's find that Japanese bomber and invite him over here. And to his family's shock, he got this letter inviting him to the United States because his family didn't know anything about this. He never told them about it. And in the 20 years since the war ended, his pride turned into shame, and he was ashamed of what he had done. But he couldn't turn down the invitation. That wouldn't be polite. So he decided to go, and he took with him his family's 400-year-old samurai sword. And his plan was he was going to apologize to the Americans, and if they accepted, he would gift the town this sword. And if they did not accept his apology, he would commit ritual suicide. Fortunately, that last one did not happen. They did accept. He actually went there several times, like I think 4 times he went there. He invited people to Japan. I love this part. He donated money to the local library to buy children's books about other cultures in order to try to get people to understand one another. You gotta love a guy like that. So I kind of told you the whole book, but it's beautiful. It's got these gorgeous drawings. You know how I am with drawings. And I just think it's a very fascinating way of looking at the war. We don't often get to hear it from the enemy's point of view. So that was my first book. My second book is a true born American. Stubby the dog. Stubby the dog showed up in 1917 when 102nd Infantry was training, and he became their mascot. He was a Boston Terrier, and he was very intelligent. He learned what the different marches were, and he would march alongside the men. He learned what the different calls were. And look at him, he's adorable. He learned what the different calls were. He knew the call for mess hall because, that was the good one. And they taught him to salute. He would get up on his haunches and he'd raise a paw to his face and he would salute. So when the men were being shipped over to Europe, first they started on a train. He hopped aboard the train, and when they saw him, they wrapped him up in a blanket and smuggled him on board the ship. When they got to Europe, their commanding officer saw him, and he saluted. And that was it. He was now the mascot of that infantry. And he was, oh my goodness, he would patrol and stand watch with them. He was wounded in 1918, and they actually sent him to the hospital with the other wounded soldiers, where the doctors removed the shrapnel. He was 6 weeks in the hospital, and then shipped back, just like any other soldier. And he actually was credited with capturing a German soldier. He knew what the German soldiers' uniforms looked like, and he saw one and jumped on him and got his teeth into the guy's pants until his fellow soldiers could come and get him. So that uniform he has was sewed by a bunch of French women after their town was liberated. They sewed his little coat, and he actually became a corporal. I know he's called Sgt Stubby, but I think that was more of a nickname. He actually did become a corporal. He met President Wilson when Wilson came over after the war. He was one of 3 presidents he met. And when he returned to the U.S., he lived with his favorite human, James Conroy, and became even more famous, and eventually passed away of old age, warm and happy and fed. And it's just such a neat story of this dog that is a true American hero, I think.
Well, thank you for sharing those joys. I was not aware of either of those stories. So it always amazes me when I get on here, especially a week like this week where we're talking mostly about nonfiction and true stories and real people and dogs, the things that you learn that are out there. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And let's have Kristen share her books in remembering Veterans Day.
Okay, so my 2 books are actually from a Native American perspective. So both of the books are written or illustrated by Indigenous peoples. And so the first book is At the Mountain's Base, which is written by Tracy Sorrell, but it's illustrated by Weshoat Alverti, who is an Indigenous native to California. And this is a really beautiful book. You can just tell from the cover page here how beautiful the illustrations are. But this is a story about a family that's anxiously awaiting the return of a member of World War II. And so it's very open and reflective with these beautiful illustrations. It shows a grandmother weaving, and the other members of the family are singing, and they're waiting, and you can kind of feel the tension in the illustrations. And then during the book, it flashes to this page where you see the pilot, and within that pilot forms a prayer pleading for peace. And just this page just was so beautiful when I looked at it. And after you go through the book, you have the author's note in the back that explains that this specific story is a fictional story about a Cherokee family, but it's actually based on the real life of Millie Rexrot, who is Ola Mildred Rexrot, and she was an Ogallala Lakota pilot, and she was part of the Women's Air Force service pilot, and they were known as WASP, and she was the only Native American woman out of over 1,000 women that participated in that. And this led me down a rabbit hole because I had never heard of WASP before, and I'm actually pretty upset that this has not been taught to me, because this is really important. So what Millie's job specifically was to fly over and be, she towed the targets for male student pilots, and then she would also carry non-flying personnel and cargo. And so she did have some action. The women did they did go to the front lines. They were involved in actual combat, but they were never really considered part of a military branch. So they were still considered civilians, even though they were doing all of this work and putting themselves in danger. And it wasn't until 2009 that they were given the Congressional Gold Medal of Honor. And in 2017, which was after Millie had already passed away, which she lived to be well into her 90s. So she lived a very long life and she was still very active. But she had a building named and dedicated for her at the Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota. So it was just really fascinating to see her and see a picture of her and see pictures of her as she got older, and also learn more about the other women who were involved in the WASP program. And like I said, it makes me kind of upset that I didn't know about this. I feel like these are amazing women that stepped up and that really did a service for our country and also sacrificed. And so I definitely encourage anybody who's interested in that to do some more research and look at this book, if nothing else, for the illustrations alone, because they're beautiful. The second book that I'm going to talk about is Code Talker, a novel about the Navajo Marines of World War II by Joseph Bruchac. And Joseph Bruchac is an Indigenous author who does a lot in the Indigenous community. We have quite a few books about him, and his books are usually children's books or juvenile books. And so this book is a juvenile book. And so I'll start with like a little segue or a little segment about what his book is about, you know, that I picked up from like the publishers, and then I'll go into a little bit more detail. So the author brings Navajo code talkers' stories to life for young adults through the riveting fictional tale of Ned Begay, a 16-year-old Navajo boy who becomes a code talker. His grueling journey is eye-opening and inspiring. This deeply affecting novel honors all those young men like Ned who dared to serve and honors the culture and language of the Navajo Indians. And so it begins with Ned Begay, and he actually gets that name through his missionary school. And his Navajo name actually means little boy because he's small in stature. And so when he was smaller, his name was Little Baby, and then as he got older, it was still Little Boy. And so his family voluntarily sends him to mission school, and it's heartbreaking. So he touches on what happens in mission school. They tell them Navajo language is horrible. It's dead. You cannot speak it here if you try. Horrible things happen to you. And in all of the segments of the story, as the storyline goes on, what I really appreciate is Bruchac ties in all of the Indigenous important aspects of it. So Ned Begay, the people would just choose whatever first name they wanted for you, and John was a very popular name, so they would just go between these names. And then Begay, a lot of Navajo families have the surname of Begay because that was part of the Navajo name for son of. So they would explain their name in Navajo, and then the interpreter would write down whatever they thought they heard. And it speaks a lot about how white people thought that they knew how to speak Navajo and they didn't, which is, in my mind, like, that's incredibly disrespectful that you could just assume you know somebody's language. Obviously, it was a different time and place, but it was really hard for me, even reading a juvenile book, to see this from this aspect. So a lot of the research I have been doing is talking about how children were taken away from their families forcibly and put into mission schools, but like his family voluntarily said, this is what you need to do because we want you to be successful. You're going to have to leave behind your culture, and you're going to have to assimilate into English culture because this is how you're going to be successful. But not only that, he goes through school, he learns English, he does so well in school, and then they hear about Pearl Harbor, and the Navajo community sends out an official message that says, you know, Navajo are Americans and we will step up and do our duty and we will be a part of this in any way that we can, which as a reader and knowing the history still blows my mind. In fact, there's so many levels of emotion in this book because you just think, with the past that you've had with this country, how can you feel patriotic? How can you want to stand up and be a part of that? And so it just really speaks to the Navajo culture, to me at least, about their dedication and their ability to love and to understand and to seek understanding through any situations that happen. And so there's this really beautiful part where Ned signs up. So he wants to sign up to be, and he's part of the second band of the Navajo Code Talkers, because the first time he was too young, he was 14. And so you had to either be between the ages of 17 and 32. But because a lot of Navajo aren't born in hospitals, they're born at home with midwives, they don't have any birth certificates. So basically, if you get your parents to say you're old enough, you can. And he has a talk with his parents and they say you have to wait another year. The year comes around, he's 16, and so he decides to go and sign up for the Marines. And so they have a ceremony for him called the Blessing Way. And his friends and family sing and pray over him, and it's just a beautiful ceremony. And they extend blessings and protection. And it was such a beautiful description and visual of, and I'm assuming because this author has done a ton of research about this book and spoke to Navajo code talkers, that like this is a legitimate ceremony that they do when somebody is about to go into a situation that could cause them harm. And so it's just really beautifully written. It feels very personal. It doesn't feel intrusive, but you just feel like very humbled that that was shared with you. So it really, for me, this whole book really highlighted kind of the cruel irony that the Navajo's language was expelled from them when they were in schools, and that when it was time to step up and when America needed the Navajo men, they came to that call, and it was because of their sacred language and because of their culture that they were able to do so much in World War II. And so it was just, even for, I mean, I haven't read any adult fiction books on this topic. I feel like I definitely will after reading this, but I feel like the author did a really great job explaining this in a way that was very straightforward, but also very emotional. It is a heavy book, but it's appropriate, and I feel like I'm very thankful that this author shared this story. So in connection with what you were saying, Jessica, just sharing this story, and now that I know, I can do more research and learn about it, and so that, sacrifice, right? Like sacrificing your culture, sacrificing your being to be a part of a country that you don't necessarily feel like you fit in with, and then to be able to contribute that and have a special part was just amazing. So those are my two.
Thank you so much, Kristen. There is so much there. And again, anytime we talk about historical books, I just realize how much I don't know. I had heard of the Navajo Code Talkers, but that's maybe as far as it went. And I only knew about the women Air Force service pilots because we did a book club book about them. And then it was so strange because we read that, and then within a few months we went to the Kalamazoo Air Museum, and they were having I think it was a traveling one. I don't think it's a permanent, but they were having a traveling, a display, a museum display. I can't think of the word right now, but of all the women Air Force service pilots there. So it was really interesting. Here's me dragging, like Tony was probably like 6 or 7 when we went, and I'm dragging him around, and he's like, I really want to go look at the planes. I'm like, no, look at what this lady did. So yeah, it just amazes me how much I don't know, and how much there is still out there to learn.
But also the human spirit, right? Like just, I'm in awe of people in general.
Yes.
Like just.
Yes. Thank you, Kristen. And Jessica is now going to share her books for in honor of Veterans Day.
Thank you. Both of my titles today are written by the same author, Marcus Brotherton. They are both based on a novel, or not a novel, a nonfiction work that I discussed on this program earlier this year, Band of Brothers by Stephen Ambrose, which is also the book behind the HBO miniseries. So Marcus Brotherton, there's been lots of books written about the story of the Band of Brothers over time, and he endeavored to write about them, but not. So many books have written as the perspective of them as a company and what this company of soldiers accomplished during the war. And he endeavored to write these books where it focused more on the individual veterans and what the individual veterans went through, what was their perspective, what was their story during and after the war. So that's sort of the premise of both of these books. So I will start with We Who Are Alive and Remain. So this is an oral history project that Marcus Brotherton endeavored, and he worked with, he had this concept of connecting with Easy Company veterans. So first of all, if you're not familiar, the Band of Brothers were Easy Company of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne. So at the time that Marcus Brotherton, started writing this book, there at one point in time, there was 366 men listed as part of Easy Company throughout the war, from the beginning to the end. And at the time that he started to research and do writing for this book in the fall of 2007, there were 40 veterans from Easy Company still alive and accounted for. And he wrote letters to all of them and reached out through phone calls. And as a result of that, 20 of the veterans agreed to participate in this book. Some of them couldn't for health reasons or various other concerns. So this book follows the story from, it shares the stories of each of the veterans, how they grew up, what was their childhood like, and sort of where they were in their life when the war started. That's the first two chapters. From there, each chapter has a central theme, starting with what's called the day everything changed, which was the attack on Pearl Harbor, going through all their experience in the war, leading up to the end of the war where they were in Austria. And then the veterans also have a chance to discuss what their lives were after the war. And then also there is a special chapter devoted to each of the veterans' thoughts on heroism. So each chapter is set up that each of the veterans is given an opportunity to share their opinion or their perspective or stories about each topic for each of the chapters. And so I found this to be the format I really liked. You had the chapter, you had the central theme, and then it would list the veteran's name and give their perspective, list the next veteran's name. I really liked this format. It made it for really quick reading, but I really liked reading everything in their own words because it's really neat to read, to learn so much about these individuals just by seeing things as varied as their grammar choices and their word choices and, you know, the different upbringings they had and experiences and how that affected their time in the war. So I wanted to share a quick local connection that was in here that really was something to me in the chapter that talked about Pearl Harbor. So each of the veterans got a chance to talk about where they were when Pearl Harbor was attacked, how they found out about it, and what their reaction was. One of the veterans featured in this work, his name is Ed Tipper, and he was born in Detroit. And on the day that the Pearl Harbor was attacked, he was actually visiting Dearborn Village with one of his friends. And he said they were on a bus there going from one part to another, and somebody ran out and stopped the bus and told them that Pearl Harbor had been attacked. And he said the bus driver stopped the bus, turned on the radio, and they sat there on a bus at Dearborn Village and listened to all this radio coverage of what had happened. And immediately he realized, you know, this is something. And so did so many of these veterans that were inspired to enlist after this, and not just to enlist, but to specifically volunteer for the paratroopers, which was more of the elite force. And then at the end of the book, the author allowed the families of 3 deceased veterans at that time to share stories of their family that was the deceased veteran, to share about their life after the war and their perspective on that. So that was, it was really interesting to me and fascinating to read this example of living history, and so many lessons I learned from this. And it's just a great book, whether you're familiar with the story of the Band of Brothers or not. It's a fantastic book, and I highly recommend it. So, as I said, the first book ended with 3 stories of families about deceased veterans, and that sort of leads into the second title, which is called A Company of Heroes. So this book is specific. It lists the stories of 26 of the veterans from Easy Company that were deceased at the time of the writing. And this gives their families a chance to share the stories of their loved ones and their perspective of growing up with them after the war and what life was like for them. And it's really, really fascinating to me as a fan of this to get to hear that. Excuse me, I'm looking at my notes here. So it's divided up into groups of sort of like the ranks. They divided up into enlisted men, non-coms, which are non-commissioned officers, and to then a section to those who were killed in action during World War II. So I really like the format of this book because since each chapter is sort of its own essay on these individual men, that you don't necessarily have to read it in any particular order. And you don't even necessarily have to read the entire book if you were looking for more information on 1 or 2 of these individuals featured in it, although I do highly recommend reading the entire book. So I found this fascinating, not just to see the perspective of the families, but also to see all the different ways that when these men came home from the war, how that affected them the rest of their lives. Some of them seem to come back and, get back into their old life pretty quickly, or to be able to, move forward, accept what happened and live with that and move forward. And there were some really inspirational stories. At the same time, some of these stories, I won't lie, are really heartbreaking, about individuals that just really had a hard time coming back to quote unquote normal life and trying to, move on past this trauma of seeing so much death, seeing that their friends died, so much destruction. And some of these men just really took this with them for the rest of their lives, spent the rest of their lives fighting that war. And it really is heartbreaking to read some of that. Although I will say that in each of those stories, the family members there emphasized that, because of their experience with their family member going through this, that now we should remember this and realize that, veterans coming home today could still be in this situation, and that it's important for them to be able to talk about these experiences, even if they can't talk about it with family or friends, find a way that they can talk about this, find a way for them to cope with this so that they don't have to carry that with them and live in misery the rest of their lives. So yeah, I really highly recommend both of these books. It's just so much more information, and especially after reading the one about the families and their perspectives and learning so much about these men after the war and what they went through. I went back and rewatched the miniseries, and it just put a whole new perspective on some of these on some of these veterans to me, like, wow, they did this and wow, they went on to do that. So highly recommend both. Great reads.
Thank you, Jessica. And now, am I echoing to anybody else?
You did for a second.
Okay, is it back to normal?
It's back to normal.
All right. Yay, technology. I will go ahead and share mine now. Mine are both very visual books. The first one is an older book called The Wall, Images and Offerings from the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. And it gives credit to Sal Lopez as the person who conceived it. So I don't know that all the photographs that are in there are by him. But what the book does is it takes images from the Vietnam Memorial and also puts it with letters and photographs and other things that have been left at the memorial. The images and the letters that are paired together on the page, they say in the introduction, may or may not be related. It may not be the person you see in the image. They just thought that putting those two together was a way to make people think about this memorial and this war. And Vietnam in particular as a war, I don't know what your history classes were like, but I was born in 1974. So I was born the year after most of the American troops had withdrawn from Vietnam. So I don't have any personal memories of Vietnam. My father did try to enlist and was turned down for medical reasons, so he did not go. So I don't have anything like that. And then when I was in high school, pretty much every history class ever that covered American history stopped at World War II. And some of that is just you get through so much curriculum and you just don't have time to get to it. So we almost never talked about Vietnam. And this book is, hopefully I'm going to turn my light off and that might make it easier to see the pictures. It's reflective right now. Some of the images in here are just so powerful. And that is a vet sitting and watching visitors to the memorial. And then this one's a really small picture, but you can see another vet with a flag, again, watching visitors. And he looks like he's wiping a tear away. And I think these are so incredible in the emotion that they give and the fact that it's remembering those who served, both who gave their lives and those who came back to a country in upheaval. You know, I think it's real easy for me to think our time period is the worst that our country has ever faced in the divisiveness. It's probably not. You know, and we made it through that. Our country's gonna make it through what we're going through now. There's this gentleman. I mean, they're just powerful pictures. One of the things we have to do as librarians, because we can't keep every book ever, is we have to say goodbye to some books. And quite often that's based on the age of the book. Because, you know, if it's talking about science, things change in science, you know, goodbye Pluto, you're not a planet anymore. We got to take care of those books. This was published in 1987, about 14 years after the conflict ended, if I did my math right. And the Vietnam Memorial was built and dedicated in 1982. So these are very, very close to that time period of people who served. And I just got a couple more. And that gentleman, I don't know what he's holding in his hand and it doesn't say, but I'm guessing that's remembering somebody he served with or somebody he lost. And then they have this picture. And the picture, the sign that gentleman is holding says, "I am a Vietnam veteran." I like the memorial. I wasn't around for the controversy around the Vietnam Memorial being built, but I know that there were people who didn't like the design. He says he likes it. And if it makes it difficult to send people into battle again, I'll like it even more. I think just like Jessica said, these stories are so important to keep sharing. I think this book is so important to keep. It might be from 1987, but it's so close to when that memorial was built. You know, a picture can say 1,000 words. I think this book does. Check it out, spend some time with it. I know I ended up in tears, so there's me. Now I got to get through my other book. So my other book, hopefully you can see, again, these shiny Mylar covers are great for protecting, not great for showing, is Coming Home by Greg Ruth. And it's a very simple children's book of a young man going and waiting for an airplane to arrive. And children won't know immediately why he's waiting. Adults are going to get it pretty quickly. And as he's waiting, he sees other people who are also getting off the plane and seeing their families. And then it comes the big moment. He sees who he's been waiting for. And I just love this picture. Look at that joy. Mom! And you just see a kid doing that. And then that hug. I missed you so much. And the artist and author talks at the end in the author's note. And he says, you know, he did research talking to veterans and their families. And he says, no soldier goes to war alone. He or she always brings along their family and their friends. I knew it. I knew I wasn't going to get through this one. But I think that's so important. And I think it's so important that we talk about these books and we keep sharing these stories and remember the people who are making sacrifices even today to be away from their moms and their dads and their kids and their grandmas and grandpas and partners. So if you made it through this with us, we hope that you do have a thoughtful, reflective Veterans Day. If you have veterans in your life, thank them on our behalf at the Monroe County Library System. We hope they come home to you safe, and we hope that they're all well. Next time, it's not going to be this bad. Next time, we are going to be talking, November is also Picture Book Month. So we are going to be talking about Picture Book Month. Can I just say, picture books are powerful. If you're an adult, and it's mostly adults who listen to this, come back for picture books. Yes. They can talk about, as Joyce said, some of the toughest topics, and kids can handle that, and they can talk about it, because a kid knows what it's like to miss a parent, so they can understand what it's like for a kid who's going to be missing their parent for a year or more as they serve. So thank you for listening. Thank you to each of you for sharing. And we will see you next time. Bye.